The Tarelian scout ship hung in the silent blackness above the dead world. Its name was the Whisper of Progress. The crew inside were reptiles, with smooth green scales and yellow eyes. They had scanned this planet called XT-77 many times. Their reports were always the same. No life. The air was thin and poisonous. The ground was covered in the ruins of a forgotten war. It was a place of ghosts, picked clean centuries ago on the surface, for humans moved through a city of bones. They wore sealed suits to protect them from the bad air and the dust. Their boots crunched on broken rock and old metal. Gene kicked a broken piece of furniture, crumbled into dust. "Nothing," he said, his voice sounding flat inside his helmet. "It is the same as the last 12 places. The Tarelians did not leave anything for us. They took it all." Sue stood a few meters away. She held a small scanner in her gloved hand. The screen showed only flat, dead lines. "The readings are the same," she confirmed. This was an orbital bombardment. A big one. No energy. No life. Just dust and silence. Team leader Hannah lifted her macro binoculars to her helmet's faceplate. She slowly turned, looking at the broken skyline. Jagged pieces of buildings stood against the gray sky like broken teeth. "Our orders are simple," she said. "We check the last coordinates on the list. We confirm the planet is empty. Then we go home. No changes to the plan." The fourth member of the team was Chul. He was older than the others. His job was to fix things and understand machines. While the others looked at the big picture, Chul looked at the small details. He was looking at a pile of rubble when his own scanner beeped softly. It was a different sound from Seuss. A low, solid ping. "Hannah," Chul said, "I am getting a strange reading from that ridge." He pointed to a steep hill overlooking the dead city. "It is a neutronium alloy. Very strong. Very heavy. It is not a Tarelian material. It is ours." This got everyone's attention. They moved as a group, climbing over fallen beams and cracked concrete. On the ridge they saw it. A structure half buried by an old landslide. It was a bunker shaped like a flat pyramid. Its surface was covered in scars and pits from old battles. The metal was thick and angry-looking. On the front, almost hidden by rust and dirt, was a faded symbol. An eagle holding a globe and an anchor. Chul stepped forward. He gently brushed the dirt from the symbol with his glove. "A Marine Corps facility," he whispered, his voice full of respect. "From before the Exodus. This is not just an old building. This is a relic. A piece of our history." Hannah nodded slowly. "A tomb, most likely. But we need to log it. Let's go inside. Be careful." The main door was a huge slab of metal, twisted and stuck partway open. They squeezed through the gap one by one. The inside of the bunker was dark and cold. The air in their suits got colder. The only light came from the lamps on their helmets. Cutting through the deep darkness, it was a tomb. The dust was thick on everything. They saw skeletons still sitting in chairs at dead control panels. The screens were dark and broken. Wires hung from the ceilings like dead vines. The silence was heavier here than outside. It was the silence of a place where people had waited for a rescue that never came. And in the middle of the main room, standing guard over the dead, was the reason the bunker was built. It was a war machine. A Mark IV combat walker, called an Ares. It was a giant, a thing of terror and beauty. It stood on two thick legs, its body a heavy block of ceramite and plasteel armor. It was taller than 3 men. One of its arms ended in a multi-barreled cannon that was twisted and broken. The other arm had a much bigger, heavier cannon barrel that pointed down at the floor. The machine was covered in the same dust as everything else. A strange, glowing crystal fungus had grown up its legs, trying to claim it. On its chest, under the main cockpit window, a name was painted in faded white letters. "Morning Star." Gene let out a low whistle. "A museum piece," he said. "I have only seen these in old history files. They were decommissioned 100 years ago." Sue aimed her scanner at the silent giant. The device hummed, its light dancing over the metal. "It is completely powered down. Its core is in a deep sleep mode. There is not enough power left to light a single light bulb. It is just a statue now." Hannah looked from the silent machine to the skeletons at their stations. A feeling of deep sadness washed over her. These were her people from long ago. They had fought here. They had died here, manning their posts until the very end. "They never gave up," she said softly. "Log its position and its condition. This is a historical site. It is important, but it is not our mission. We are leaving." The team turned to go. But Chul did not move right away. He was an engineer. His eyes saw the world in wires and circuits. While the others saw a dead machine, he saw a design. A different way of thinking. The Tarelian technology was smooth and biological. It used living nerves and thoughts. But this old human machine was different. It was built with bolts and wires. It was built to be fixed. His eyes moved over the walker's ankle joint. There, partly covered by the glowing fungus, was a small metal panel. It was a type of port he had not seen in years. A manual hardline port for a physical cable. The Tyrellians would never have seen this. Chul muttered to himself. Their tech does not work this way. This is for a direct connection. For emergency repairs or diagnostics. Chul. Hannah's voice came over the comms. We are leaving. Now. Just 1 second, leader. Chul replied. He reached out, not for the machine, but to clear the fungus from the panel. He wanted to see it clearly. To remember it. As he pulled his hand back, the heavy toolkit on his belt caught on a piece of broken conduit hanging from the ceiling. He twisted to free it. As he did, a small, cylindrical object fell from his open tool belt. It was a power cell, small and silver, used for testing old circuits. It clattered against the metal floor, bounced once, and rolled directly into the small, open port on the walker's ankle. There was a soft, metallic click. The sound was tiny in the enormous silence of the bunker. Nothing else happened. Chul sighed, relieved. He bent down to retrieve the power cell, but it was seated firmly inside the port. He could not get it out with his gloved fingers. He decided to leave it. It was worthless anyway. A dead cell in a dead machine. He turned and followed the others out of the tomb, back into the pale light of the dead world. The giant walker, the morning star, stood exactly as it had for 500 years. Silent, dark, a relic guarding its dead. But deep inside its ancient core, a trickle of power, so small it was almost nothing, had flowed from the cell. It was not enough to wake the giant. Not even enough to light a single diode. But it was enough to make the machine dream. In the absolute blackness of its slumber, a single command written in simple code was recognized. The command was, standby mode initiated. The sleep was now a little less deep. The giant was not awake. But for the first time in centuries, it was listening. The human team moved away from the dark bunker, their boots kicking up little clouds of pale dust. The sky above was a dull, unchanging gray. Behind them, the pyramid-shaped structure sat silent on the ridge, holding its secrets. No one looked back. They had a job to finish. Jean walked a few steps behind Hannah. That was creepy, he said. All those skeletons just sitting there, and that big robot standing over them like a metal ghost. It was a monument, Hannah replied, her voice calm but firm. A sad one, but our mission is about the present, not the past. We have one more location to check. Then we can call for our ride home. Sue consulted her wrist-mounted data screen. The last survey point is 2 kilometers east, a place that was once a communications hub. It should be just over that next hill. They walked in silence for a while. The only sounds were the crunch of their steps and the soft hum of their suit systems. The land was dead. No plants, no animals, no wind. It was a giant graveyard. Chul was quiet. His mind was not on the mission. It was back in the bunker with that machine. The morning star. He kept thinking about the design of the access port. It was so simple, so sturdy. Modern human tech was sleek and used touch interfaces. Tyrellian tech was grown, not built. But that old walker was pure, brutal function. It was made for a soldier to fix with a wrench and a spare part in the middle of a battle. He felt a strange respect for it. He also felt a little guilty about the lost power cell, but he told himself it did not matter. The machine was a fossil. They reached the top of the low hill. Below them lay the ruins of the communications hub. It was a wide, flat area filled with the skeletons of giant satellite dishes. They looked like the skeletons of great metal flowers, now bent and broken. A large central building had collapsed in on itself. Spread out, Hannah ordered. Standard sweep. Look for any active signals, any energy sources. Sue, you take the central building's perimeter. Jean, check the eastern dish array. Chul, the western side. I will stay here for overwatch. Be quick. The team moved down the slope. Sue found a mostly intact wall and began setting up her long-range scanner. Jean started poking through a pile of twisted metal that was once a satellite dish, looking for anything interesting. Chul walked towards the western edge of the complex. His job was to check for any underground power conduits or data lines. As he walked, his eyes scanned the ground. Then he saw something that made him stop. On the dusty ground, pressed into the dirt, was a track. It was not a human boot print. It was a 3-toed print, long and narrow. It was fresh. His heart beat a little faster. Hannah, he said into his comms. I have something. A track. It is not human. Hannah's voice was instantly alert. Describe it. 3 toes. About a foot long. The edges are sharp. It was made recently. A tense silence fell over the comms. Then, Sue's voice cut in, quiet and urgent. Hannah, I am getting a reading. A very faint biosign. It is not on the surface. It is below us. In a tunnel system under the complex. They were not alone. Before Hannah could give an order, The ground near Jean seemed to explode. A section of dirt and metal panels flew upward. From the hole, a figure leaped out. It was tall and slender, covered in shimmering green scales. It had a long head with a bony crest and large yellow eyes. It held a weapon that looked like it was grown from bone and crystal. A Tarelian scout. It landed in a crouch and aimed its weapon at Jean. Jean froze, his hands in the air. "Don't move, Jean," Hannah commanded, her own rifle coming up. But she did not have a clear shot. 2 more Tarelian scouts emerged from other hidden holes in the ground. They moved with a fluid, silent grace that was unnerving. They had been down there, listening, waiting. The lead Tarelian made a series of clicking and hissing sounds. A moment later, a translator device on its belt spoke in a flat, electronic voice. "You are trespassers. This world is under Tarelian protection. You will drop your weapons." Hannah kept her rifle aimed. "We are a survey team from the Terran Republic. We are here by right to investigate historical human sites. We are not trespassing." The Tarelian took a step closer to Jean. Its weapon hummed with energy. "Your right is irrelevant. You are primitive. You contaminate this space. You will be detained. Your technology will be studied." Chul and Sue had moved closer together, their backs to a broken wall. They were surrounded. The Tarelian scouts had them outnumbered. Their weapons were advanced plasma casters. The human rifles were good, but a fight here would be short and they would lose. Hannah knew this. She made the only choice she could. "Stand down," she said, her voice heavy. "Do not resist." She slowly bent down and placed her rifle on the ground. Jean, Sue, and Chul did the same. The Tarelian leader made another click. 2 of the scouts moved forward and collected the human weapons. Another one produced thick, organic-looking bonds and began tying their hands behind their backs. "We have done nothing wrong," Hannah said to the leader. "Our government will protest this." The Tarelian looked at her, its yellow eyes unblinking. "Your government is far away and weak. It speaks too much and does too little. We are the power in this sector now. You are a curiosity, nothing more." The scouts finished tying them up and began pushing them forward, towards the hidden tunnel entrances. They were being taken underground. As they were led away, Chul looked back over his shoulder. He looked past the broken dishes, towards the ridge where they had found the bunker. He could just see its dark shape against the gray sky. He thought of the dead soldiers inside. He thought of the silent, powerless walker. He thought about the galaxy, where old human giants slept while new powers like the Tarelians walked over them. He felt a small, foolish hope. That power cell. It was dead. It was nothing. But for a second, he let himself imagine what it would be like if the old stories were true. If the giants could ever wake up. Then he was pushed down into the dark tunnel, and the hope was gone, replaced by the cold reality of captivity. The tunnels under the communications hub were dark and damp. The walls were not made of concrete or metal, but looked like hard-packed earth, almost like the inside of a giant insect nest. A faint, greenish light came from glowing fungus that grew in patches on the walls. The air was cold and smelled of wet soil and something else, something sharp and alien. The Tarelian scouts pushed the 4 humans forward. Their hands were tied behind their backs with a material that felt like strong, flexible roots. It was tight and uncomfortable. Jean stumbled on an uneven part of the floor. One of the Tarelians behind him gave a sharp hiss and nudged him forward with the barrel of its plasma weapon. "Take it easy," Jean muttered, but he kept walking. They were led into a larger chamber. This one had a higher ceiling and strange, pod-like structures growing from the walls. In the center, the lead Tarelian scout stood by a flat, stone-like table. It was studying their confiscated weapons and gear. Hannah stood tall, trying to show no fear. "You have no right to do this. We are citizens of the Terran Republic. This is an act of aggression." The Tarelian leader ignored her. It picked up Sue's scanner with its long, 3-fingered hand. It examined the device with apparent disdain, then tossed it onto a pile with the other items. It made a series of clicks to its companions. The electronic translator on its belt spoke. "Your tools are crude. Your presence is a mystery. Why do you come to this dead world? There is nothing here for your kind." "We told you," Hannah said, her voice steady. "We are studying our history. This was our world once. A failed world." The translator replied flatly. "Your species failed to hold it. We are now the guardians of this sector. Your history is a contamination. We will cleanse it as we cleanse all things." Chul felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "Cleanse?" he whispered to Sue. Sue's face was pale. "I think he means they are going to erase any trace of us being here, including us." The Tarelian leader turned its yellow eyes towards them. It seemed to have heard. It pointed a clawed finger at each of them. "You will be questioned. Then you will be disposed of. Your ship will be taken for analysis. It is the way of things." The finality in its translated voice was terrifying. They were not prisoners of war. They were pests to be exterminated. Point two of the scouts moved forward and began pushing Hannah and Jean towards one of the pod-like structures on the wall. It looked like a giant, upright seed pod. As they got closer, they could see the inside was lined with soft, pulsating tissue and thin, root-like tendrils. Hannah struggled, planting her feet. No! Get away from me! The Tarelian scout was strong. It easily forced her towards the open pod. The tendrils inside reached out, twitching, as if sensing her. Back in the main part of the chamber, Chul and Sue watched in horror. They were held firmly by the other scouts. Chul's mind raced, but he could think of nothing. Their weapons were gone. They were outnumbered. He looked around the organic room, searching for anything he could use, any weakness. There was nothing. His eyes fell on the pile of their gear. Next to Sue's scanner was his own tool belt, and clipped to that belt was his datapad. It was a simple device used for reading technical manuals and schematics. It had one special feature he used for working on old systems: a short-range, low-power wireless link. It could send a simple on or off signal to compatible hardware. A crazy, impossible idea flashed in his mind. The Morning Star. It was an ancient machine, but it was a machine of war. It would have systems for receiving signals, battlefield updates, distress calls. It was a 1 in a billion chance. The machine was dead. The power cell was dead. It was a stupid, hopeless thought. But it was the only thought he had. He subtly shifted his weight, trying to get a better view of the datapad. If he could just tap the screen through his glove. It was preset to try and link with any old military system it found. It was a long shot. The scout holding him noticed his movement and tightened its grip, its claws digging into his arm. Chul winced in pain. Just then, the lead Tarelian walked over to the pile of gear, picked up Chul's datapad. It looked at the screen, which was dark. With a contemptuous flick of its wrist, it tossed the datapad against the wall of the chamber. The device hit the soft, organic wall with a dull thud and fell to the floor. The screen did not break, but it lit up for a second. A small, blinking icon appeared in the corner. A symbol for signal seeking. No one noticed. The Tarelian leader turned its attention back to Hannah, who was now just a step away from the horrifying organic pod. Chul's heart sank. His stupid, last-ditch hope was gone. Shattered on the floor. He had failed. He looked at Sue, her eyes wide with fear. He looked at Hannah, about to be put into that thing. He felt a crushing wave of despair. They were going to die here, in the dark, on a dead world, and no one would ever know what happened to them. High on the ridge, deep inside the dark and silent bunker, the Morning Star stood as it had for centuries. The tiny trickle of power from the lost cell had kept its most basic sensors in a state of minimal awareness. It was not awake. It was not alive. But in the deep quiet of its core, a receiver, older than the dust covering it, detected a flicker. It was a ghost of a signal, weak and fading. A simple, automated ping from a nearby device trying to find a friend on the network. A network that had been dead for 500 years. The signal was not a command. It was not a voice. It was more like a tap on the shoulder. A question in the dark. Is anyone there? For 500 years, the answer had been silence. This time, deep within the sleeping giant, a single line of text scrolled across a dead screen in a language no one had spoken in centuries. // signal acquired. // origin. Terran tech. // priority. Low. // status. Standby. Nothing else happened. The red eyes of the walker did not light up. Its limbs did not move. It remained a statue in a tomb. But the silence inside the bunker felt different now. It was no longer the silence of death. It was the silence of something listening. The lead Tarelian scout watched as two of its subordinates forced the human female leader towards the interrogation pod. The pod's inner lining pulsed with a soft, internal light, and the thin, root-like tendrils writhed in anticipation. The human, Hannah, was strong. She dug her heels into the soft floor of the chamber, her body rigid with resistance. "You cannot do this!" she shouted, her voice echoing in the organic space. The Tarelian leader made a series of quick, sharp clicks. The translator on its belt remained silent. It did not need to translate the meaning. The message was clear in the aggressive shove that sent Hannah stumbling forward. One of the tendrils from the pod lashed out, wrapping around her arm. It was surprisingly strong. She cried out, more in shock than pain, as she was pulled off balance and into the pod's embrace. More tendrils snaked out, coiling around her legs and torso, holding her upright. They did not seem to be hurting her, but the sight was terrifying. The pod itself began to glow brighter, and a low, humming sound filled the air. "Hannah!" Jean yelled, struggling against the scout that held him. He was slammed against the wall, the breath knocked out of him. Sue watched, paralyzed with fear. This was worse than anything she had imagined. They were not just going to be killed. They were going to be taken apart, studied by this living technology. Chul could only stare, his mind a blank of horror and guilt. His stupid idea with the datapad had come to nothing. He had led his team here. It was his curiosity about the old bunker that had distracted them, that had maybe even led the Tyrellians to them. He looked at the datapad, lying on the floor with its screen dark. It was just a piece of junk now. Inside the pod, Hannah felt a strange pressure in her head. It was not pain, but a weird, probing sensation. She clenched her jaw, trying to fight it, to build walls in her mind. She thought of her home, of green fields and a blue sky, anything to keep the invaders out. The Tyrellian leader watched, its yellow eyes unblinking. It was pleased. The process was beginning. Soon, it would have all the information about this human survey team. Their ship's capabilities, their home base, their defenses. It was all so easy. These primitives were no match for Tyrellian science. Back in the bunker, the Morning Star was processing. The single, faint signal from the datapad had been logged. It was a simple hello from a piece of compatible hardware. On its own, it meant nothing. But the walker's programming was not just about receiving signals. It was about analyzing its environment. For centuries, its external sensors had been dead. Now, with the tiny, continuous trickle of power from Chul's cell, a few of those sensors were operating at the very lowest level point. One of them was a passive audio receiver. A microphone of sorts designed to listen for the sound of battle, for the specific acoustic signature of weapons fire, explosions, and human distress. It heard nothing for a long time. Then, it heard something. It was faint, muffled by hundreds of meters of rock and earth. It was the sound of a human voice, raised in a shout. It was the sound of a struggle. And then, a clear, sharp cry of distress. The sound was filtered through layers of ancient programming. It was compared to thousands of hours of battlefield recordings. The analysis was swift and brutal. The sound was identified. / audio input detected. / profile match. Human female. Distress vocalization. / classification. Hostile action in progress. / threat to USMC personnel confirmed. Deep within the walker's chest, a power conduit that had been cold for 5 centuries suddenly grew warm. A capacitor older than any living human began to charge. It was a slow process, like a glacier moving. The tiny power cell could only provide a trickle, but it was enough. It was a start. The Morning Star was no longer just listening. It was waking up. In the Tyrellian chamber, the lead scout tilted its head. A low, rhythmic thumping was coming from somewhere. It was a deep, vibrating sound that seemed to come through the very ground. Thump, thump, thump. It was slow and steady, like a giant heartbeat. The other Tyrellian scouts heard it too. They looked around, their weapons rising, their heads cocked in confusion. The sound was not part of their base. It was alien to them. Chul heard it. He felt it through the soles of his boots. His eyes went wide. He knew that sound. He had studied old archival footage. It was the sound of a Mark IV combat walker taking a step. A single, heavy step. "What is that?" Sue whispered, her voice trembling. The Tyrellian leader made an angry hissing sound. It gestured to one of its scouts, who immediately ran out of the chamber to investigate the noise. The thumping stopped. A new sound began. This one was a high-pitched whine, like a giant engine spinning up after a long sleep. It was coming from the surface, directly above them. Dust and small bits of dirt rained down from the ceiling of the cavern. The scout that had left came running back in. It was clicking and hissing rapidly, its body language screaming alarm. It pointed upwards. The lead Tyrellian scout ignored the pod and Hannah for a moment. It strode to the center of the room, looking up at the shaking ceiling. Its translator finally spoke, its flat voice for the first time sounding uncertain. "Seismic activity? Impossible. The geology is stable." Chul looked at the terrified Tyrellian scouts. He looked at the dust falling from the ceiling. He looked at Sue, and a wild, impossible hope bloomed in his chest. "It's not seismic," he said, his voice low but clear. The Tyrellian leader turned its yellow eyes towards him. Chul smiled a hard, grim smile. "You shouldn't have ignored the relic." The high-pitched whine from above grew louder, turning into a deafening roar. The entire underground chamber shook violently. Large clumps of dirt and rock broke free from the ceiling, crashing to the floor. The green glowing fungus flickered. The Tyrellian scouts stumbled, their confident hisses turning into cries of alarm. The lead Tyrellian looked from the shaking ceiling to Chul's face. It saw the grim certainty there. For the first time, it felt a flicker of something unknown. Doubt. Then the ceiling exploded. A massive metal foot, larger than a human, smashed through the earth and rock. It was covered in thick, ceramite armor, pitted with ancient scars and stained with rust. It crushed one of the glowing pod-like structures flat. Dirt and debris rained down into the chamber. The Tyrellian scouts scattered, firing their plasma weapons wildly at the new threat. The green bolts of energy splashed harmlessly against the giant metal leg. The foot lifted and disappeared back through the hole. For a second, there was a pause, filled only with the panicked hisses of the Tyrellians and the groaning of the damaged chamber. Then, a single red beam of light lanced down through the hole in the ceiling. It swept across the room, a malevolent eye searching the darkness. It passed over the tied-up humans, paused for a microsecond on Hannah, still trapped in the pod, and then locked onto the lead Tyrellian scout. From above, a voice boomed. It was not a living voice. It was a synthesized roar, gritty with age and static, but filled with an undeniable, thunderous power. Unidentified hostiles. Engaged in hostile action against USMC personnel. Counterforce protocol engaged. The Morning Star had arrived. Its other foot crashed through another part of the ceiling. The walker was now standing half in, half out of the underground base, its massive body blocking out the gray sky. Its head, a blocky sensor array, swiveled down, its two crimson eyes burning in the gloom. Its left arm, the one with the multi-barreled cannon they thought was destroyed, suddenly moved. The barrels spun with a deafening mechanical snarl. SHK. The sound was immense. The heavy bolter fired a storm of shells into the group of Tyrellian scouts. The plasma bolts stopped instantly. Where the Tyrellians had been standing, there was now only a red paste and shattered pieces of chitin scattered across the walls. The storm of fire moved, chewing apart the organic structures of the chamber. Destroying everything in its path point, one of the Tyrellian scouts near Jean raised its weapon. A single shell from the bolter caught it in the chest, and the alien simply vanished in a pink mist. The attack was over in seconds. The room was filled with smoke and the smell of ozone and blood. The only Tyrellian left was the leader, who stood frozen near the center of the room, its weapon hanging limply in its hand. The Morning Star's head turned, its red eyes focusing on this last target. It took a single, ground-shaking step deeper into the chamber, its metal fingers flexing. The Tyrellian leader seemed to snap out of its shock. It turned and ran, scrambling towards a dark tunnel at the far end of the room. It was fast. The walker did not chase it. Its right arm, the one with the huge, heavy cannon, began to move. Servos whined as the massive barrel rose, tracking the fleeing alien. A deep, charging hum filled the air, building in intensity until the very air vibrated. Priority target. Fleeing hostile. Arming main battery. A brilliant, blinding blue light gathered at the cannon's mouth. The light was so bright it hurt to look at. It illuminated the entire ruined chamber in a harsh, actinic glare. The Tyrellian leader was almost at the tunnel entrance. The Morning Star fired at it was not a bolt of plasma or a projectile. It was a continuous beam of pure, white-hot energy. It was a lance of destruction. The beam touched the back of the fleeing Tyrellian, and the alien vanished without a sound, without a trace. It was erased from existence. The beam did not stop. It continued into the tunnel the Tyrellian had been running towards. The earth and rock of the tunnel walls did not melt or burn. They vaporized. The beam kept going, carving a perfectly smooth, glass-lined tunnel deep into the planet's crust. The ground shook with a deep, rolling tremor. Then, the walker moved its arm. The terrifying beam swept upwards, cutting through the rest of the chamber's ceiling like a hot knife through butter. It carved a massive opening to the surface, allowing the gray daylight to flood in. The beam shut off. The sudden silence was deafening. The only sound was the slow, cooling click of the walker's massive cannon. The Morning Star stood amidst the ruin it had created, its red eyes now dimming to a soft glow. It was still. The fight was over. For a long moment, the humans were too stunned to move. Then, Chul stumbled forward, his hands still tied. "Hannah!" he yelled. He ran to the interrogation pod. The tendrils had gone limp, their light faded. Hannah slumped forward, and Chul caught her, unable to use his hands but supporting her with his body. She was breathing heavily, but she was alive. Her eyes were wide, staring at the giant machine that had saved them. Jean and Sue rushed over. Jean found a sharp piece of shattered chitin from a dead Tyrellian and sawed through the root-like bonds on Sue's wrists. Once free, she quickly did the same for him and then for Chul and Hannah. They stood together, for small humans in the shadow of a giant. They looked up at the war machine. It was silent now, a monument once more, but the air around it still crackled with residual energy and immense power. Jean finally spoke, his voice full of awe. It erased a mountain. They looked towards where the main beam had fired. Through the giant, newly carved opening in the ceiling, they could see the distant horizon. A mountain that had stood for millions of years at the valley's edge was now gone. Its top half had simply vanished, replaced by a smooth, glowing, glassy crater. A plume of superheated steam and dust rose slowly into the sky. The Morning Star had not just killed their captors. It had rewritten the geography of the planet to make its point. Sue looked from the walker to the altered horizon and then to her teammates. The Tyrellians called us primitive. They called our history a contamination. Hannah, her voice shaky but clear, finished the thought. They were wrong. They didn't ignore a relic. They ignored a warning. The morning star stood guard over them, a silent sentinel once again. But its message was now carved into the very stone of the world. Humanity was gone from this place, but its wrath remained. And it was a wrath that could erase mountains.